I love knitting because it is just a meditative process for me. It's my personal time to sit quietly by myself with just my yarn and my needles. My name is Casey Hendrickson. Our project is the cable knit hat that is bold yet simple, finished off with a faux fur pom pom. I started knitting when I was in college. When I first started knitting, I was terrible at it. But to be honest, after college, I kind of let it down. I stopped knitting for a little while, and I didn't pick it back up until I had my first child. And I needed that space again. I needed that quiet time, the time without my infant son, just to kind of be at peace. It took me a few months to kind of get good at it again. Once I kind of got to that point, something clicked in my brain and I said, oh my gosh, I think I'm ready for the next step. I think I'm ready to tackle some cables, or I think I'm ready to try a new textured stitch. Many beginner knitters often wonder, what do I do with my hank of yarn when I'm getting ready to knit? The easiest thing to do is simply take off the tag, unwind your hank in its entirety, and put it on a swift, and take that yarn and wind it around your ball winder and begin winding it into a ball. And once you have that ball, you're ready to knit. It's much easier to knit from a ball than of course a hank, because if you have a hank, it will end up in a tangled mess of spaghetti yarn all over the place. I think that people are drawn to these slower, meditative crafts, and I've made knitting just a part of my lifestyle because it makes me feel so good. It's not about that end result. It's about, you know, the journey, the process. Knitting the brim is fairly simple. I start with a long tail cast on, and then I knit about 1.5 inches of a twisted rib stitch. And twisted rib is fairly simple by using a knit through the back loop stitch. What that does is create just a little bit more of a unique look to your brim, but it still has that nice elasticity around your head. And in fact, when I look at the element of the twisted rib, I actually see a little bit of a faux cable within the ribbing because it looks like a little bit of a braid, and I think that's why I love it so much. When you're a beginner knitter and once you've accomplished just those simple knit and purl stitches, you're ready for that next step because all you're doing with a cable is just adding one extra element to it, one extra needle, and all you're doing is holding your stitches to the front or the back of your work and knitting as normal. The center cable, right smack in the center of that hat, is a big braid. And I'm talking, it's extra big. It is created by using a series of left-leaning crosses and then later on using right-leaning crosses to create kind of a braided effect as it climbs up the pattern. I like to make my cables sometimes extra big so that people will stop you and say, wow, that hat is amazing. Giving back to yourself creatively is important, especially if you are a creative person by nature. You can pick up knitting needles and you can create. Creating is one of the most amazing processes to watch yourself go from start to finish in a smooth and seamless, sometimes not so seamless process. Ironically, when I was in college, I think I discovered yoga and knitting all within the same, about a year. And I started to see that it was transforming me emotionally and physically, mentally, and at the same time I had knitting as well. And I just started to feel amazing. Something truly clicked in my mind that these things that I was doing for myself were making me feel really good. I could find that through yoga and through knitting, I could have that creative outlet at home while still being an engaged and active mother. Faux cables look like cables, but they're actually not. Instead of using a cable needle, I'm simply going to decrease during one row, increase on the next row, and then have one buffer row in order to create kind of a cool twisted cable effect without actually having to use a cable needle. So I teach a beginner knitting class in my local library. To watch them go from the day one of tying a slip knot and casting on to a few weeks later where they're actually learning to join in the round and knit hats. It's just so incredible to see people overcome the barriers that they put in front of themselves, and they think, I can't do it. And it's so amazing to see them just accomplish that. After your first couple rows in the decrease section, it's time to switch to double pointed needles, mainly because your 16-inch circular needles are going to be too big as your circumference of your hat gets much smaller. So the double pointed needles help you knit a small circumference. Do not be afraid to mess up. Mess up. Intentionally mess up. Drop a stitch. Learn how to fix it. Learn how to go back in your knitting. Because once you're fluent in fixing some of these pretty basic and simple mistakes, you're gonna feel so much more confident in your work. Once you get down to 8 stitches, it's time to cut your yarn and weave the rest of your yarn through the remaining stitches and cinch it up tight. Create a knot, and you're done. Oftentimes when I get to the end of a knitted hat project, I don't feel like winding yarn anymore to make a big yarn pom-pom. So sometimes I choose to use a faux fur pom pom. They're easy to come by nowadays. There's so many people making them, and you will be stopped by somebody saying, let me see that fun pom pom on the top of your hat. So it just adds the finishing touch, kind of the icing on the cake for a bold design. Don't get stuck in the simplicity of knitting. Once you understand the knit stitch and the purl stitch, and you're confident with that, and you're consistent with it, and your tension is right, you are ready for the next step. You're ready for cables. And this hat will walk you through how to do that. It's that simple. And once you're finished, you will look at your design and say, I made that. That wasn't so hard. And then you're gonna go to the next project and you will be hooked.